Are you looking for ways to attract and retain private pay clients? Thrizer is a payment platform for therapists built to help clients automatically tap into their out-of-network benefits and save on therapy up front. Check out our special link, join.thrizer.com/modern therapist, and use the code Modern Therapists to activate $2,500 in free payments with Thrizer.
Therapy Notes, the #1 trusted EHR among mental health professionals, just keeps getting better and better. With legendary customer support 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, they're giving you all the tools you need to succeed, whether you're a solo clinician or a group practice. Try them free for 2 months using promo code MODERN today.
You're listening to the Modern Therapist Survival Guide, where therapists live, breathe, and practice as human beings. To support you as a whole person and a therapist, here are your hosts, Curt Widhelm and Katie Vernoy.
Welcome back, Modern Therapists. This is the Modern Therapist Survival Guide. I'm Curt Widhelm with Katie Vernoy, and this is the podcast for therapists about being therapists and the things that go on in our field. It's also a podcast about having terrible introductions to therapist podcasts. And this is an episode that we're joined by one of our longtime friends, Dr. Melvin Varghese, and just kind of talking about being therapists, about kind of the transitions that end up happening in our careers, refocusing, re-energizing, reimagining what we're doing. And just welcome back to the show. Thank you very much for being here.
Thank you so much for having me. I am like flabbergasted at that intro. Like I think I might need that on my podcast here.
Own who you are is really a big theme that we have around here.
It's a good life lesson.
Well, Mel, it's so good to have you back on the show and good to see you. I love having you as one of my friends, but we'll get you started with the question we ask all of our folks. Who are you and what are you putting out into the world?
Yeah, no, and before we jump into that, Katie, thank you, Curt. Really incredibly grateful for our friendship. And I think it's one of the things I most love about our field, is these connections and these just meaningful connections. So I'm a licensed psychologist by training. I live in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. I never imagined living in the Northeast in my life because I was born in India and then grew up in Texas, outside of Dallas my whole life, and then spent a couple of years an internship and postdoc in Nashville and progressively made my way up to the Northeast. And I've been here since 2012. I'm also a podcaster, course creator. I'm the founder of Selling the Couch, and which is basically a podcast, a blog that helps therapists go from clinical to online income. So how do we move our income and our impact beyond just the therapy room? And I specifically focus on helping therapists get podcasts and online courses out into the world.
Like us, you're describing a lot of interests, a lot of just spreading information about the field, about being able to kind of take all of the different options of being a therapist. And like us, your career is kind of swung in some directions, a lot heavier than others. You're swinging back into seeing clients a little bit more now. And so you've seen kind of a lot of different angles and aspects that go into the field here. And we start a lot of our podcasts with just kind of maybe help other people not make the same mistakes that we've been seeing or made ourselves. What do you see that therapists usually get wrong about the energy that they put out into whatever it is they're doing, their business ventures? Let's help some people out here.
Yeah, it's a great question. I would say the thing that immediately came to mind is trying to do too many things at one time, right? I think like the classic example that I've seen is social media channels or practical thing. I'm going to start a podcast. I'm going to get active on LinkedIn. I'm going to run a Facebook group, all of those kind of things. And the reality is I actually tried that the first year and this is what you should not do. But it was a formula for burnout. And it's like you can never go fully deep in any one of those because you're just trying to like juggle all of these balls, right? And so what I would say is, I have this new mantra, which is get going, then get good, then get smart. And I think usually for most therapists getting going on a new venture, I think it takes 1 to 3 years. And then getting good probably is like year three to, beyond. But then getting smart, I think, really starts coming probably year 4, year 5, where you're thinking about systems, actively thinking about those things. So I think the related thing is, I think a lot of times I do feel like us as clinicians were like maybe a little less susceptible, but I definitely do see us being susceptible, which is we want all of these things yesterday. And why is it not happening yesterday? So I'm now gonna, stop doing insert whatever, right? Stop being active on LinkedIn or stop a podcast because I'm not getting the traction. I'm gonna go try the next thing, kind of thing.
Is that something that you see with even like experienced clinicians? Because part of me is hearing this is like, that sounds like, kind of trying to jump into the fields and maybe dealing with some imposter syndrome or trying to get credibility. It might just be kind of also explained just developmentally of like trying to do things. But I'm also maybe seeking just permission of like, now that Katie and I are past this, we're totally immune from this kind of stuff, right?
Teach me your ways. Yeah, you're absolutely right. Like there, I don't think what is that one phrase? Like the the more I know, the less I know, or whatever, like that version of that is. And I feel like that's so true. I mean, even like at a practical level, like what this was, I don't know how, less than a year ago when Threads came out, right? And I was like, should I be on Threads? And I was like, Mel, do not go on Threads. You are like, you are doing enough, right? And but I still feel it. In fact, even this morning, I was like, man, I've got just a shade under 5,000 followers on Twitter. Should I be getting back on Twitter? you know? And it's like, it is. It's really, the thing I've come to realize is I feel like as clinicians, especially, to get a grad level degree, we have a tremendous amount of resilience to be able to do these things. And it's not that we can't do them. But I think the challenge will be like, the bigger question is, do we want to do them? And does it actually make sense for the pace and the season of life we're in? And that's a question I've been asking a lot of. It's not that I can't grow on Twitter, but I also have a toddler at home. And, we're entering a season where we're caregiving for, or going to be caregiving for aging parents, right? And all that stuff outside of business takes time, And so how do you, I don't know, like see all of it in a more holistic light versus just, I'm going to be focused on this one business venture. It's hard though. Definitely don't have it figured out.
There's so many shoulds that come into play, and I'm thinking about both of the things that you're talking about. There's like the getting started with a business venture. I should be doing all these things. I should be already making it. Like there's those things where those shoulds come into play. But when you started talking about season of life, I've got a different season of life that I'm kind of in, but I feel like there's still shoulds of I should be successful in this way, or I should define success in a different way. And I remember, because I was in your mastermind for a while, and I remember talking about like I had to be close to Melvin because otherwise I would keep going into this should of a success definition that wasn't mine. And so maybe you can share that wisdom, Melvin, about like how you got to the place of defining success in a way that was very unique to you, that honors all of those different areas, the season of life, the different things that are the realities of what's going on for you
Yeah.
as an individual.
First of all, you guys are putting me on some kind of pedestal. I do not want this pedestal. No, I very much like Katie, like to be honest, I'm still like navigating and figuring this out. Just on a personal level, I think I was not expecting to go here with this one, guys, but we'll go here. Our daughter was born in 2018, and even before that, we went through a season of infertility. And when we found out we were pregnant, and we were like, as with, most parents, like overjoyed. And every screening, every test was like perfectly normal. And then I was getting ready to go to podcast movement, and it was 32 and a half weeks, literally. And podcast movement happened to be in Philadelphia that year. And it was like 5 a.m. brushing my teeth, and then I hear my wife scream, and then I come out the door, and there's like, water on the floor. I'm like, what in the world happened? And so, I mean, the next thing we know, we're jetting to the ER, and they basically said, we have to stay. They're going to try to keep the baby in from 32 and a half weeks to 36 weeks. We lasted until that Thursday, so 4 days. And basically, I forgot what the exact term was, but placenta, like, I think the wall was collapsing in on the baby. So to answer your question, Katie, there was a moment, I think it was around 3:15 in the morning, where just like the hour prior, the doctors had come in and said, we have to do emergency C-section. And they basically took my wife down to the operating room, and they said, this is like pre-pandemic, right? So they were like, you can't come in because like the risk is too high. And so I'm like literally in this hallway, and I can hear doctors, I can hear everything on the other side, but I don't know what's going on. I hear them say like the baby's out, but I don't hear the baby crying. I think this must have only been for 60 to 90 seconds, but it felt so long. And come to find out, the medication they had given to my wife to put her under, somehow it was not enough, and so they had to give more. And so I didn't realize this, but those beds can actually like invert to like make the medication go in faster. And somehow our baby had ingested some of that. And so I don't know, like there was a moment where I didn't know if I would lose my partner and my child. And I think when you go through a moment like that, it really makes you wonder like what is enough and what is the purpose and meaning of it all. Because you're right, like left to my own kind of devices. I mean, child of immigrants, first generation, my parents literally said, we are bringing you and your brother to the US because we want to give you better educational opportunities. So my natural bent is to try to super achieve and try to do all of that. But this is the process. I could joke about it, but like it is a lot of unlearning. And I don't think I have it all figured out, because it means like I let go of some opportunities, or I say like, I'm not gonna take this traditional like W-2 employment opportunity because, being home at a certain time matters or whatever it is. So
Thrizer is a payment platform designed for out-of-network therapy. As a therapist, you would use Thrizer to charge clients for sessions and collect your full rate upfront. From the client's perspective, Thrizer links to their health plan, so insurance claims are automatically submitted for them upon every charge. From there, Thrizer manages the claims end-to-end so that your clients don't have to worry about manually submitting super bills or getting on calls with insurance. The best part? Thrizer allows clients to only pay their co-insurance portion for sessions, while Thrizer covers the rest of your fee and waits for reimbursement on their behalf.
They also offer you an instant benefits calculator for free, allowing you to provide upfront transparency to prospective clients on their out-of-network coverage. Therapists only pay a standard 3% credit card processing fee per session with no additional fees. Visit join.thrizer.com/modern therapist to get started and use our promo code modern therapists to receive $2,500 in waived fees for your sessions.
I think there's a theme that we're all talking about here that we'll put the source of this quote in the show notes. I don't remember it off the top of my head, but the quote that's standing out to me is, when I was young, I set out to change the world. And when I realized that I couldn't change the world, I tried to change my town. And when I couldn't change my town, I tried to change my family. And it wasn't until I was much older that I realized that I could only change myself. And I feel like a lot of the conversations that Katie and I have had behind the scenes and getting ready for this episode and hearing you talk is that we've all done a lot of stuff, and we'll probably continue doing it, but we have all set out to try and make therapy a better space, make it more approachable for a lot of people. It's really just about growing ourselves and about being able to define things for what is important and what is successful for us. And I know that I don't always stay in like, okay, this is just about me and growth kinds of things. But in your process, you're talking about how your personal and your professional growth is very intertwined. There's parts of you that shows up more publicly than others about this. And in giving people the permission to do that, what are you finding? I mean, we hope that not everybody has to have such a life altering event to be able to stay in this. What is your advice for people?
Yeah, I mean, I think so sharing something I just shared, right? I would not have there was no way I would have shared that like in 2015, right? I don't think I'd done the inner work. I don't think I was like confident in my own self, right? So I think the one advice I would just say is like pace yourself, you know? All of it looks different for everybody. It's always good to have people that you look up to and role models and all of those things. But at the end of the day, the story is your own and the pace is your own. And I think the sooner you can intentionally embrace that, I think the better it is. But that takes work, you know. And I still go back and forth, you know, sometimes, you know, like, oh, did I like overshare or but I try to really do come from a place of like how do I connect as a human? And I also think you're right. Like her, like I think as you, I mean, I feel like we're all kind of similar, right? Like, so in terms of like, I got licensed in 2012, and I feel like just the way things evolve and the way that I have grown as a person, I think I'm willing to share more because there's a part of me I feel like, man, you know, I wish somebody had shared these kind of things with me, you know, in a real way versus like always presenting it like it was always put together, you know.
It's interesting because I think about, even a few years ago, a lot of the ways that that Kurt and I were teaching people to market themselves was this kind of curated authenticity and sharing just the right amount and having the story be almost like a triumphant story. And listening to you talk about the birth of your daughter and how that impacted you so deeply, it's raw. It's just like this was a moment of revelation. It wasn't like, and then I decided this, and this is my tidy little package, right? Like it seems like as a society, we're not putting up with that stuff anymore, like that kind of false authenticity. And so I'm just curious for you were talking about like things are shifting and how you're shifting. The curated authenticity to me is something that felt really good because it was one step away from that really put together blank slate therapist or health and wellness professional. But it just isn't sitting anymore. And I know that there's, so many people, influencers doing all this stuff on TikTok or on, Instagram or Facebook or whatever. And it seems like as I've watched you, there's been a shift in how you're showing up and how you're publicly kind of building this new era for yourself in public. Like you're sharing. I read yesterday, I think it was yesterday about, like I'm starting my practice. What do you guys think about this? Like it's something where you're always just real. And I think that there's a difference between that and that kind of cultured, curated authenticity. Where do you see this stuff going? Because you stay ahead, you do all these things, and how are you navigating that as you're moving into a different stage of your career?
Yeah. I call it failing forward to be because I don't think any of us have a full clue on, you know, how to navigate on any of this. I mean, there's so many things happening both globally and in our field, right? I mean, AI is just the tip of the iceberg, right? I mean, who would have thought? I mean, I got licensed in 2012. I was like, AI, somebody had mentioned AI, I would think like, I don't know, like Terminator,
Yeah.
robots or something, right? Not, Chat GPT that's able to spit out all this stuff, right? And my thought is with AI, especially, information and content is easier than ever to produce, right? But I think what is going to get lost, or the people that lean into authenticity, I think have an advantage, even though it doesn't feel like right now there's an advantage. I mean, even just sharing like a personal sort of, just from a user perspective, I've been getting quite active on LinkedIn in the last like 14, 15 months. And I've seen like posts where I can tell like they're almost like AI engineered posts, right? Like they've got a very scheduled, I'm going to post 5, 6 times a week, kind of here's the story, here's this. And I'm not sure if like, as a user, I find myself like clicking off of that. And I'm like, oh, okay, here's, 20 pieces of life advice that I knew at 31 that I didn't know at 21. Like, you know, I'm just kind of wondering if other people are having that experience. And so what I've been trying to do is actually dial back on content creation, but when I'm trying to create, do it more from like a place of being helpful, leading with heart, The leading with heart is hard because this is a piece I don't know. I mean, having a young daughter, I mean, I'm very thoughtful, or probably very thoughtful about, like, I don't share pictures of her or any of that on social, right? Like, there's like a very safety element I'm like aware of, but I don't know. I mean, hopefully, when she's 18 and she's not like coming in, Dad, I can't believe you posted that YouTube video 7 years ago, So, but I don't know if that fully answers it. I mean, I think it's a lot of just trying to like walk gracefully through it, but realizing you're probably going to stumble a little bit. And, but I do think like this general thing of, I don't think more content is going to be the differentiator. I actually think it's probably less content, but with more art.
I know I've experienced kind of a similar thing that, in building out our podcast and just connecting with a lot of other professionals in the field, scrolling through Facebook or Instagram just felt like, or LinkedIn especially, just felt like one chicken soup for the soul story after another, where it was just like, here is one incredibly moving graphic after another that all just kind of blended together and made it very inauthentic. Like that just kind of made it very difficult to continue regularly showing up in that space. There's a value that you're speaking to here, a personal value of what works best for you that you're really leaning into.
Yeah. I have a mantra, which is decades over days. And so that's sort of the way that I think about like building on anything. And part of decades over days is, I mean, even with my podcast, right? When we first released in 2015, folks kept saying, like, you got to release every week because that's how these download numbers are going to go up. And I didn't know anything. And they did go up, but then nobody told me about the cost of that, like trying to release an episode like most weeks. I mean, it's a formula for burnout, or just it's hard to find that creative spark to show up every week after week, right? And so
We know nothing about that. We're still doing weekly Melvin. It's crazy.
yeah, I mean, I know we've had chats about this, and it's yeah, I don't know. It's hard. I mean, it's not like, I have like something all figured out. And even sometimes like I notice like again with like LinkedIn, or just started on YouTube, and I'm like, man, if I post a little more, I could get this. Or, oh, I remember when this person started on LinkedIn with me. They have like 5 times the amount of followers that I do. What happened? But, and like, oh, should I be posting more? All of that still stuff comes up, and sometimes I do fall into it. But I think the general thing I've tried to just lean into is, what does success look like for me? how do I manage most of us as clinicians are this way, have a conflicted relationship with social media, right? And
Yep.
so how do we how do I use this as a tool where I can share a message, but how do I not let it become a part of my life? I mean, I can even share like a little personal story. When I first started on LinkedIn, this was probably about 2 months in. It's like so excited. And I was like, I'm going to post on whatever Monday, Wednesday, Friday. There was like one time, literally, I had auto scheduled a post out, and I'm sitting in our daughter's park, like school parking lot, on LinkedIn because I downloaded the LinkedIn app on my phone, waiting to engage with my posts. And I'm like, at like 8:45 a.m. in the morning, I'm like, oh, what are you doing? This is absurd. Like this should not, yeah, it's not the way. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, it's hard. It's really hard because that stuff does, I mean, it's signaling at the end of it, right? There's a certain signal you're putting out. And we are all, I think, gravitate towards success and looking for models and, all of that stuff. And yeah, there's another great article, which I'll share with you guys. It's written by Will Reynolds. Is CEO of Sierra Interactive here in Philly, and he has a two-part, and it's all about what is enough. It's a really interesting article about what if you have achieved all of the quote unquote things you wanted to achieve, but it doesn't leave you happy, and what does that mean? And so, it's been a great article. It's been very grounding, I'll reference off and on.
Not only does Therapy Notes combine billing, scheduling, notes, secure messaging, group telehealth, and more into one streamlined platform, they're also always adding new features and forms to their library. So no matter your specialty, Therapy Notes has you covered.
Learn more at therapynotes.com and use promo code MODERN for 2 months free. So, jokes aside, I know that you shifted to seasons for your podcast, and you've also gone off of different social media platforms or chosen not to go on social media platforms. And you've been very thoughtful about it. And so I would like a little bit more information kind of your decision-making process, even if it was chaotic. Just kind of like how you are making your decisions now of what you're doing when you're doing it, and what are the trade-offs that you're paying attention to.
Yeah, I think this is a really, really good question. Again, I'm like figuring this out. I think there's probably a couple of frameworks. So I'm 41 now, and I think a lot about at 51, I don't want to be doing this kind of heavy lifting. And so one big thing I try to think about is what are platforms where the effort that you put in compounds over time, even if I have to step away. So like, for example, podcasting, right? Our episodes get found weeks, months, years later, right? YouTube is another great example, right? Owned by Google, right? That stuff. So I lean into those kind of platforms where I call them like relationship deepening platforms, and ones that where the effort compounds later. I think the reality is, let's just take podcasting and YouTube. They take time to build an audience, right? It's not like unless you're like have some established huge credibility, it's not like you release one episode and it's like, 1,000 downloads or something, right?
Yeah.
So you usually need one of these other platforms. I call them like discovery platforms. So these are basically platforms where people are hanging out that you can use to drive people from that discovery platform to the relationship platform. So practically what this means is I use LinkedIn as sort of a discovery platform. And then I, lean pretty heavy into podcasting. And now we're starting on YouTube. And so those are the relationship deepening platforms. But ultimately, I'm trying actually to move the folks that resonate the most with my message to an email list because I've learned this the hard way. We have a Facebook group that I started concurrently in 2015. I invited like 40 of my colleagues from, various trainings and grad school and all this stuff. And I've seen, and I remember those early days, like when Meta, Facebook was like really emphasizing Facebook groups, right? So pretty much any post you made in there, you would see it. And I've gone the other side of it where, now it's like, seems like it's very de-emphasized, right? And the reach has really lessened. So, I think the Facebook group is around 9,700 members, but the last week we've had this weird thing, but typically I would be very surprised if like of the 9,700 where you're getting like 5 to 10% reach. That's like good, you know?
Mhm.
So I'm like, I don't know that I want to play that game when I'm 51, or 61. So I don't know if that fully answers it, but I'm basically, what I've come to realize is I can probably handle max 3 social media platforms at one time. But again, that's been built up over time, right? So I did 8 years of podcasting, and then we added LinkedIn in the last couple of years, and now we're doing YouTube. But YouTube just seemed to sort of make sense just because it's just turning the video on, and then getting it edited. So yeah, and then also I felt like, I mean, YouTube is going so big on podcasts, right? And I think that's an interesting play, you know. So
Where you're at in your career, where we're at, where we have a lot of, this decades starting to be built up, we even have a fair amount of privilege in being able to plan out, from 41 to 51. For those of our audience who are earlier in their career, who might feel more of the urgency to have to respond to things, what's your advice to them?
urgency to respond like on social, or what do you think?
Urgency to build, urgency to need to get some of the payoff sooner to be able to, whether it move from an agency into their own practice or to establish themselves, to put themselves onto the path of a Melvin or a Curt or a Katie.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like I know that the investment into mental health in Silicon Valley, I think that's like a something I think a lot of therapists are thinking about, right? I do feel like there are tools now available now if you're a clinician getting started out and that wants to kind of go into solo practice. I don't think that was available. I mean, I remember when I was in the group practice, like the option was basically either do private pay or try to get credentialed with each of these panels. And it just seemed like a very long and almost like nightmare situation where if you made one mistake, you were going to get rejected or, I mean, there's a bunch of these companies. I'm sure you guys have talked about them. Alma, Headway. I think those are like the two big ones, right? If you do want to go down that route, where you want to start a practice, but you don't want to get fully through that insurance credentialing. But I also know, like each of these companies, I mean, there's stuff you got to be really judicious and navigate about too, and just broadly, right? And I think if you just do any sort of a whatever company and just do Reddit, like you'll find some, conversations. I think that's just, to me, it's like just, I fault no one for whatever decision because at the end of the day, like people have to provide a livelihood and figure out stuff, and everyone's got unique nuances to think about. But I think it's also wise to try to gather as much information so you can make an informed decision.
You've moved into a new stage of your own career where you're gonna start seeing clients again, and that's a big decision. How'd you get there?
That was a big decision. Yeah, I created a longer video on this like a couple of weeks ago. This is still pretty new and fresh in my mind. It's obviously been something I've been thinking about. So I went full time with STC during the pandemic, and I realized a couple of things. One, I miss the work. I genuinely miss the therapy work. I think the second thing is I feel like there's some wisdom in having a clinical arm now with so much money getting thrown into AI and into Silicon Valley. Our colleagues trust us, and at the end of the day, I I feel like it's getting harder and harder for me to like distinguish between like is this a company that I want like to back or be connected with without having a clinical arm? So that's like the third one. And then I think that the third reason is I just think we're in a different time post pandemic, you know. During the early days of the pandemic, there was a lot of panic. And then in the years after, I think there was a influx of financial resources that folks had. Whether it was stimulus checks or whatever it was, right? Or not traveling as much. And so they just had more discretionary income. I want to like diversify a little bit. Again, I think for me personally, like from an energy perspective, 75 to 80% of the energy will still stay with selling the couch. But I think it's not quite clear, but I do have a gut feeling that all of it will kind of line up. Like the me doing the clinical work will help me make better content for STC. Me doing STC will help me to do better clinical work. So,
How are you thinking about setting up your practice this kind of second time around, or designing your niche or that kind of stuff? Because this is adding a business where they're really, you've only really been doing one business at a time typically, right?
yeah, that I think is honestly the biggest source of anxiety that I have because I know you guys understand this. I know many of the folks listening understand this. To be able to do this, it's an incredible privilege, right? And I do feel like we are like gatekeepers for our profession, and it's a wonderful privilege. And yet at the same time, I'm like keenly aware of like people are looking to us of like, were they managing this, right? And so, yeah, I mean, how am I managing it? I do have a fair amount of anxiety. Even I feel like it definitely lessened in the last week, but for about 2 weeks there, I had pretty bad insomnia, worried about like, okay, this has got to be two different LLCs, two different bank accounts, two different everything, right? And I know I'm really good with singular focus, but I think I've also come to realize I think this initial stage, right? Getting a LLC, going through the state board, like doing SciPact, all of this stuff. Like this is stuff I'm not going to have to do regularly, but
Sure.
but I think that's part of it too. It's like the overwhelm of that. How am I thinking about it? Like I feel again, I'll probably fail forward a lot of this stuff. Um, I know I'll probably, my goal is right now somewhere between like 1 to 4 clients. I'd like to charge, higher rates and specifically the niches and all of that stuff. The one thing I've picked up from a lot of these podcast conversations is niches are something that constantly evolve. And I think sometimes when we're first starting out, there's this pressure to have it certain. And if we pick the wrong, quote unquote, wrong thing, we're like stuck in some sort of hole that we can never get out of kind of thing. I felt a lot of that in the last 2 weeks, like, okay, and even like practically, right? I think one logical thing for me is like working with founders or on, like whether that's and founders of color, venture backed founders, founder dads, kind of managing both. That's like one logical area. The other logical area is, I mean, I don't think there are a ton of Indian psychologists, male, Indian male psychologists, particularly, right? So I have a real heart for second gen, like Asian Indian Americans. And so there's stuff that I would love to, specifically kind of work on primarily with that population, but not necessarily. I know like many of us are entering like caregiving for parents that have terminal illnesses, and grief and loss has been like an interesting one that I've really wanted to explore. I think related to that, I think there's like death of a parent. I think that's a big one. The
Yeah.
other big thing, and I alluded to it at the very beginning, was we went through our own fertility journey, and I would love think about and work with men navigating the fertility journey because I remember going through this process and it was so hard to figure out how to support my spouse when I myself didn't know, and I felt so overwhelmed. And yet, looking back, like that ability to stay composed through that whole journey is such a critical piece of it, And yet what I've noticed is there aren't a ton of those conversations happening. So,
Where can people find out more about you and all of the wonderful projects that you're putting out into the world?
of course, it's over at sellingthecouch.com. And then my private practice site is at melvinvarghese.com.
And we will include links to those in our show notes over at mtsgpodcast.com. Join us in our Facebook group, the Modern Therapist Group, and continue to listen to us weekly as Katie and I continue to somehow still keep finding some of the creativity. And we appreciate all of your support. And until next time, I'm Curt with Katie Vernoy and Dr. Melvin Varghese. Remember to check out Thrizer. They are passionate about making out-of-network therapy work for everyone. Clients save upfront on therapy while therapists earn their full rate. Get started in minutes on join.thrizer.com/modern therapist and use the promo code Modern Therapists and receive $2,500 in waived fees for your sessions.
Thanks so much to our partner, Therapy Notes, the highest rated practice management solution for behavioral health. Don't forget, using promo code MODERN gets you 2 free months.
Thank you for listening to the Modern Therapist Survival Guide. Learn more about who we are and what we do at mtsgpodcast.com. You can also join us on Facebook and Twitter. And please don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss any of our episodes.